There are moments in history when humanity believed it was invincible. And then, within just a few months, everything turned to ashes. No invading army was needed, no weapons of mass destruction required. Just a single invisible pathogen was enough to transform crowded cities into vast graveyards. Civilizations that once ruled the world collapsed amid the sound of coughing. Desperate prayers, and fear spreading faster than wildfire. These are the 10 devastating pandemics that ravaged the ancient world, leaving scars on human history that would never fully heal. Firstly, the Black Death. October in the year 1347. The port of Messina on the island of Sicily welcomed 12 merchant ships drifting into the bay beneath a leaden late autumn sky. The Mediterranean Sea was unnaturally calm, as if the water itself were holding its breath. Tattered sails hung loose, ropes struck the masts with a dry, hollow sound. There was only the smell, the stench of death, of rotting flesh mixed with salt and tar. On the decks lay scattered corpses. The living staggered like ghosts, their skin gray, their eyes sunken deep. At the neck, beneath the arms, in the groin. Black swollen tumors rose like demonic fruit rooted beneath the skin. No one knew they were witnessing the opening of a pandemic that would tear apart the structure of an entire continent. Within days, Messina became a city of moans. High fever raged, body temperatures soared, driving victims into delirium and uncontrollable shivering. Chills ran along the spine like blades of ice. Lymph nodes inflamed and enlarged, so painful that the slightest touch provoked screams. Then internal hemorrhaging began. Death came within 2 or 3 days. Swift, brutal, unforgiving. The ships were driven from the harbor, but it was too late. Dock workers, guards, priests administering last rites had all been exposed. From Messina, the disease spread to Palermo, then crossed the sea to Genoa and Venice. Trade routes, once the lifeblood of European civilization, became arteries of death. Florence and Marseille began burying the dead at an unprecedented pace. By the year 1349, London trembled with the constant tolling of church bells, and Paris was shrouded in the smoke of mass graves. About 1/3 of Europe's population vanished within just a few years. Villages abandoned, fields untilled, cities so silent that footsteps echoed along stone streets like the sound of a world already dead. In many places, deaths doubled or tripled official counts. Medieval civilizations once confident in their permanence now trembled before an invisible enemy. According to the most widely accepted explanation today, the culprit was the bacterium Yersinia pestis, transmitted by fleas parasitizing black rats. When infected fleas bit humans, the pathogen entered the lymphatic system. It caused swollen lymph nodes, the characteristic buboes that gave bubonic plague its name. In some cases, bacteria invaded the bloodstream causing septicemia, or entered the lungs, while creating pneumonic plague capable of spreading through respiratory droplets. Ancient deoxyribonucleic acid studies from 14th century remains detected traces of this bacterium lingering in the bones of the dead. Yet the speed of the Black Death troubled many historians and epidemiologists. Typical plague depends on rat and flea populations and spreads more slowly under certain climatic conditions. However, the pandemic of 1347 advanced with storm-like velocity, crossing harsh winters and sparsely populated regions. Some descriptions suggest extremely short incubation periods and near total mortality. Hypotheses mention a particularly virulent strain or interaction with other pathogens. Others point to unusual climate conditions of the Little Ice Age altering ecosystems and triggering rodent and parasite population surges. The origin of the catastrophe is traced eastward to Central Asia, where steppe meets desert. The Silk Road trade network may have inadvertently transported the pathogen across thousands of kilometers. The siege of the city of Kaffa on the Black Sea is often cited as a decisive moment. Chronicles recount that besieging forces hurled plague-infected corpses over city walls. Merchants fled by sea carrying not only silk and spices, but disease. No single index case has ever been identified. The pandemic appeared to erupt simultaneously in multiple locations. The social consequences were as devastating as any war in ancient history. The feudal economic structure dependent on vast numbers of serfs collapsed in fragments. As labor grew scarce, the value of the living rose. Wages increased despite decrees attempting to freeze them. The old order fractured under the pressure of mass death. The church, the spiritual and political center of medieval Europe, suffered severe damage. Thousands of clergy died caring for the sick. Prayers, penitential processions, days of fasting failed to halt the plague. Public faith wavered. Communities sought scapegoats, and Jewish populations in many cities were accused of poisoning wells and massacred in riots. European art and thought transformed under that shadow. Paintings of the Dance of Death appeared on church walls. Literature became obsessed with mortality and human fragility. Meanwhile, port cities began isolating ships for 40 days, laying foundations for modern quarantine. Medicine, though still primitive, was forced to evolve. By the mid-1350s, the first wave weakened. Population had plummeted, yet society was irreversibly changed. Recurrences appeared in later centuries, less severe yet still terrifying. From collapse and chaos emerged conditions for economic and intellectual transformation. A new world flickered within the ashes of the old. Even so, the reasons for such catastrophic lethality remain not fully explained. The combination of bacteria, climate, trade, and social conditions may have produced a chain reaction beyond human control. Modern studies continue exhuming remains and decoding ancient deoxyribonucleic acid. Each answer uncovers another layer of mystery. The Black Death was not merely a pandemic. It was a biological earthquake that shook the foundations of ancient and medieval civilizations, erased millions of lives, reshaped power structures and belief systems. The year 1347 stands as a grim milestone. The funeral bells of that year seem to echo across centuries. Second, the English sweating sickness. The summer of the year 1485, England was still trembling after the blood-stained years of the Wars of the Roses. Smoke from Bosworth lingered as the Tudor dynasty took shape. An invisible enemy followed soldiers back to London. It carried chill in the bones and death in every drop of sweat. The disease was later called the English sweating sickness. The name alone sent shivers through generations. Early records appeared in August of the year 1485. Soldiers who seemed healthy suddenly fell ill within hours of reaching the capital. Laughter turned into violent shivering and unexplainable fear. There was no rash, no swelling, no warning sign, only piercing chills followed by overwhelming sweat. Clothes were soaked and beds drenched. The sweat smelled sharp and sour. Hearts pounded violently and breathing grew desperate. Many collapsed within 3 hours. Some survived until the 6th hour. Then life faded without ceremony. Morning health became afternoon corpse. London sank into panic within weeks. Church bells tolled without pause. Families locked doors, but wood could not stop invisible air. Young and old suffered alike. Merchants, scholars, priests, and nobles were not spared. Unlike the plague, this illness struck the strong and healthy. Fear spread faster than the sickness itself. The court of Henry VII moved constantly to escape infection. Royal carriages left at night heavy with dread. Officials recorded deaths, yet numbers lagged behind reality. The first wave faded quickly like a sudden storm, but it returned again and again. The years 1507 and 1517 saw renewed outbreaks. The peak of horror arrived in the year 1528. London once more burned with heat and anxiety. The court of Henry VIII fled the capital. From England, the sickness crossed the North Sea. It reached Hamburg, Lübeck, Bremen, and other northern cities. Each place saw sudden onset rapid death, widespread panic. Trade halted and markets emptied. Ships lay silent at harbor. Strangely, the disease did not advance into southern Europe. It seemed to stop before the Mediterranean boundary. Italy, Spain, and much of southern France were spared. Physicians were confused by its uniqueness. The illness unfolded in hours like an immediate sentence. Some blamed poisonous vapors rising from marshes. Others blamed imbalance of the four humors. Patients were kept warm and forbidden to sleep for 24 hours. Rooms were sealed in thick blankets wrapped tightly. Sweat flowed while strength drained away. Modern medicine suggests acute cardiovascular and respiratory collapse. Initial chills may reflect sudden inflammatory response. Rapid heartbeat, chest pain, and breathlessness signal circulatory failure. Severe dehydration from sweating worsened shock. Death occurred amid rapid multi-organ collapse. But what was the pathogen? One hypothesis points to hantavirus transmitted by rodents. Another suggests inhalational anthrax caused by Bacillus anthracis. Some propose a highly virulent influenza variant. None fully explain the pattern described. There were no preserved samples, no stored tissue, no ancient deoxyribonucleic acid for analysis. 16th century bodies dissolved into cold soil. History preserved text, not cells. In the year 1551, the final outbreak was recorded. After that, the English sweating sickness never returned. This disappearance deepened the mystery. Plague recurred for centuries. Smallpox raged until vaccination. Influenza mutated seasonally. Yet this disease exited history like a shadowy actor leaving stage. Its social impact extended beyond death counts. Sudden mortality within hours shook belief in sacred order. Sermons spoke of divine punishment. Families knelt beside sweat-soaked relatives. Faith did not slow collapsing heartbeat. Trade and production halted with each outbreak. schools and courts closed their doors. Unlike continent-wide pandemics, it did not erase 1/3 of populations. Its terror lay in speed and surprise. It could kill on a bright morning without resistance. It embodied absolute fragility. Today, scholars face only written descriptions. Yellowed pages speak of sweat chills, chest pain, and death. The sickness stands between science and legend. It remains a whisper from silent graves never fully understood. Third, the Coccolesli epidemic. The summer of the year 1545, the Mexican highlands burned beneath a gray sky. Lake Texcoco shrank, exposing cracked mud. On land, once center of the Mexica Empire, villages faced Coccolesli, meaning pestilence and destruction. It arrived without cannon fire or horses. It came in the silence of suffocating nights. A healthy man by day trembled with fever by night. By morning, blood seeped from his eyes. Within 3 or 4 days, death finished its work. The first outbreak erupted in the year 1545. Indigenous communities, already weakened by labor and famine, faced a fiercer enemy. Historians estimate 5 to 15 million natives in Mexico and nearby regions died within a few years. The number meant empty plazas, silent fields, abandoned temples without dawn incense. Spanish and indigenous chronicles described sudden high fever, violent headache, dry tongue, and burning skin. Then hemorrhage began. Blood flowed from nose, mouth, and eyes. Dark drops mixed with sweat and dust. Some developed jaundice, showing severe liver damage. Urine darkened and bodies collapsed rapidly. Death followed septic shock and circulatory failure. But the pathogen remains unknown. Studies of 16th century teeth found Salmonella enterica paratyphi C. The theory suggests malignant typhoid fever, yet extreme bleeding and rapid mortality exceed typical Salmonella infection. Other scholars propose an unknown hemorrhagic virus similar to Ebola or Marburg. Such viruses damage blood vessels, causing widespread bleeding and rapid death. No soft tissue samples survive to confirm. The bodies dissolved long ago in dry soil. Coccolesli was also an environmental disaster. The 1540s brought severe drought to central Mexico. Tree rings and sediments show declining rainfall and failed harvests. Indigenous labor in mines and plantations endured malnutrition. Immune systems were eroded. Spanish settlers appeared less affected. Mortality among Europeans was significantly lower. Differences in living conditions, nutrition, or partial immunity may explain this gap. After several years, the wave subsided. In the year 1576, it returned with similar force. Priest-recorded deaths so numerous burial became impossible. Bodies were piled and mass graves dug quickly. Church bells rang, then fell silent. Within a century of European arrival, indigenous population of Mexico fell by 80 to 90%. Coccolesli was not alone. Smallpox, measles, and other infections preceded it. The outbreaks of 1545 and 1576 were devastating peaks. Cities became ruins. Terraces abandoned and forests reclaimed. But cultivated land. Vegetation regrowth may have reduced atmospheric carbon dioxide influencing climate during the Little Ice Age. A regional epidemic became geobiological force. Spanish colonial systems were restructured. After the 16th century, Coccolesli vanished. No comparable outbreaks were recorded. Perhaps the pathogen went extinct or mutated. Perhaps survivors developed immunity. Modern scientists analyze bones and teeth seeking molecular traces. On the Mexican highlands today, the sun still strikes ancient stones. Wind passes pyramids and colonial churches. Coccolesli remains a biological and historical turning point. It marked near demographic destruction of a conquered civilization and silent fever reshaping history. Fourth pandemic, the Plague of Athens. The year 430 before the Common Era. The long walls linking Athens to the port of Piraeus were packed with refugees from Attica. Offshore, the Spartan fleet circled like a hunting shadow. Inside the city, people crowded into narrow houses and makeshift shelters under the strategy of Pericles. No one saw the second enemy that arrived with the ships. Summer came with heavy heat, then fever. According to Thucydides, a surviving witness, the illness struck without warning. The healthy burned from within. Eyes reddened with violent inflammation. Tongues and throats swelled. Foul breath followed by dry cough that tightened the chest. Then bleeding began. Blood seeped from mouth and nose. Skin flushed red, then darkened. Some suffered convulsions. Others fell into delirium with unbearable thirst and leaped into public wells. Those who survived the first week faced late complications, including necrosis of fingers and toes. Death came after 7 to 9 days in many cases, faster for weakened bodies. Athens, city of philosophers, sculptors, democracy, and tragedy, became a suffocating chamber of sweat, blood, and funeral smoke. The air itself felt heavy with despair. An estimated 100,000 people died. Among them was Pericles, architect of defensive strategy and political soul of the city. His death created a void of leadership during war. The Athenian democracy, already fragile, began to tremble. The city slipped into disorder. Laws were ignored. Fear of gods and courts faded because death arrived faster than judgment. Burial rites collapsed. Bodies were stacked and burned without ceremony. These scenes signaled a society fracturing at its moral core. Thucydides described the disease in a cold, clinical tone. He recorded it so future generations could recognize it if it returned. It did not return. Biologically, the plague remains a mystery. No firm conclusion closes the case. Many scholars support typhoid fever, especially after ancient deoxyribonucleic acid from a mass grave near Kerameikos revealed Salmonella enterica cerevar typhi. Typhoid can cause high fever, abdominal pain rash, and intestinal bleeding. Yet severe limb necrosis remains difficult to explain. Smallpox was proposed, but classic pustules were not described. Some speculate malignant measles or an unknown hemorrhagic virus causing clotting disorders and multi-organ failure. There is no definitive proof. Biological evidence remains insufficient to end debate. War created perfect conditions. Population from Attica crowded within walls. Water systems strained and sanitation declined. Ships constantly docked at Piraeus, linking Athens to Mediterranean trade. Under such pressure, one pathogen turned the city into an enormous incubator. Political consequences were swift. The death of Pericles cleared the way for less cautious leaders. Democracy drifted toward populism and reckless strategy. During the following years of the Peloponnesian War, Athens made grave errors culminating in the Sicilian disaster. Religion also trembled. Prayers to Athena and Apollo could not halt fever and bleeding. Temples filled with the sick seeking refuge. When they died within sacred space, the boundary between holy and mortal blurred. Faith in supernatural order weakened. Then, as with many ancient epidemics, it faded. Perhaps the pathogen exhausted susceptible hosts. Perhaps weather or behavior disrupted transmission. Perhaps a level of herd immunity emerged. Athens survived but never fully restored its former confidence. The columns of the Parthenon still stand pale beneath the Attic sun. Greek tragedy is still performed and philosophy still flourishes. Yet behind these achievements lingers memory of one summer when reason bowed to fever and blood. Civilization battled nature within the bloodstream and lost certainty forever. The fifth pandemic, the Plague of Amwas, the year 639 Common Era. The land of Palestine lay beneath harsh Mediterranean summer sun. At the small village of Amwas, between Jerusalem and Ramla, the camps of the Rashidun Caliphate stretched across dry hills. Armies that had conquered Syria and the Levant now paused in tense silence, not because the Byzantine enemy advanced, but because something invisible moved through tense wells and breath. At first, there was only fever. A young soldier collapsed during roll call. His forehead burned and his pulse raced. Chills ran along his spine despite desert heat. Days later, painful swellings rose at his neck and groin. More soldiers fell. Soon the camp became a place of groans. Swollen buboes appeared at armpits, groin, and neck. Some coughed blood with spreading lung damage. Others sank into delirium soaked in sweat, turning pale, then ashen. In many cases, death came within 3 to 5 days, swift and without negotiation. Later Islamic historians estimated about 25,000 died. Among them were senior commanders who had led expansion under Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab. Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah, one of the most respected generals, was said to have died. His death echoed beyond the camp across the young Muslim community. This was not merely disease. It was a blow to an emerging empire. Modern scholars often connect the plague of Amwas to bubonic plague, possibly a return of the Justinian pandemic from the 6th century. Painful swellings, high fever, and rapid mortality align with Yersinia pestis, yet no archaeological or ancient deoxyribonucleic acid evidence confirms it. Some historians suggest typhoid fever or another septic infection spreading through crowded military conditions. Still, the speed of death and swollen nodes keep plague the leading candidate. Whatever the pathogen, the consequences were unmistakable. At that time, the Rashidun Caliphate stood at the height of expansion. After defeating Byzantium at Yarmouk in 636, Muslim forces controlled much of Syria and Palestine. Campaigns advanced toward Egypt and deeper into Mesopotamia. Then the epidemic struck like an invisible wall. Disciplined camps became improvised quarantines. News of commander deaths spread fear. Caliph Umar reportedly considered entering the infected region, then returned to Medina citing reason and faith. Religion shaped response to catastrophe. Some saw divine test and purification. Prayers rose among tents. Yet faith could not halt bacteria carried by fleas and rodents if it was plague. Palestine stood as crossroads of trade and armies. routes linking Egypt. Syria and the Arabian Peninsula formed a vascular network. Soldiers, supplies, and animals moved constantly. Ideal conditions for transmission. 25,000 deaths in the 7th century was catastrophic. Each fallen soldier left strategic gaps. The disruption slowed expansion. Campaigns paused and leadership reorganization became urgent. The caliphate did not collapse. It continued expanding in later years. Yet the plague of Amwaz marked a fragile moment of instability. Like many ancient epidemics, it faded. No comparable resurgence followed immediately. No decades-long wave like the Justinian pandemic appeared. It struck devastated, then retreated into historical shadow, leaving memory of a summer when invisible disease shook imperial ambition. The 6th pandemic, the American Great Dying. The year 1519. Spanish sails appeared off the coast of Mexico under Caribbean sun. Hernán Cortés stepped onto the continent with soldiers, horses, steel, and the cross. The Aztec Empire still stood strong, and Tenochtitlan rose from the lake like a jeweled city. No one saw what traveled with those ships hidden in breath and wounds. Within 1 century of the arrival of Cortés, about 90% of the indigenous population of the Americas vanished. This was not a statistic, but the collapse of civilizations, communities, and millions of lives. War, slavery, and violence played cruel roles. Yet epidemic disease delivered the fatal blow carried by Europeans shaped by centuries among livestock and dense populations. Smallpox is often named the primary killer. Early accounts describe bodies covered in rash and pustules that burst and scarred, leaving mass death. When smallpox struck Tenochtitlan in the year 1520, it spread faster than Spanish armies. Aztec warriors fell ill covered in lesions. Yet not every wave matched classic smallpox. In the year 1545, a disease called cocolisli erupted across the Mexican highlands. Witnesses described sudden fever, cracked lips, and reddened eyes. Intense thirst followed by severe bleeding from nose and mouth. Death often came within days. In 1576, another outbreak returned with similar force, erasing villages and memory. Modern scholarship has not confirmed the pathogen behind cocolisli. Some hypotheses favor viral hemorrhagic fever. Ancient deoxyribonucleic acid from remains in Oaxaca suggested Salmonella enterica linked to typhoid fever. Yet widespread bleeding and rapid mortality do not perfectly match typical typhoid patterns. Competing theories remain unresolved. Environmental context in the 16th century worsened catastrophe. Climate research shows severe droughts in central Mexico. Lakes receded and harvests failed. Malnutrition weakened immune defenses. War and forced labor disrupted social structure and traditional care systems. Disease entered both bodies and fractured societies. Mortality rates exceeded historical norms. In many regions of Mexico and Central America, populations dropped from millions to small remnants within decades. Tenochtitlan was destroyed and rebuilt as Mexico City upon blood-stained foundations. In the Andes, the Inca Empire weakened from epidemic before deep Spanish advance. Mass depopulation led to widespread land abandonment. Forest reclaimed cultivated fields and vines covered temples. Continental reforestation reduced atmospheric carbon dioxide, according to some studies. This may have contributed to global cooling known as the Little Ice Age, leaving climatic imprint from human loss. The disappearance of 90% within a century stands as the greatest demographic shock in human history. Religious, linguistic, and intellectual traditions fractured. Indigenous priests, guardians of ancestral memory, died without successors. European colonial systems rose upon emptiness, building churches atop former temples. Questions endure within the shadow of tragedy. Multiple pathogens may have struck simultaneously: smallpox, measles, influenza, and typhoid, creating lethal chain reactions. Cocolisli may have been separate, now vanished or evolved. Historians, epidemiologists, and climate scientists continue debate, yet the full picture remains blurred. The American Great Dying was more than epidemic. It was collision of microbes, conquest, environment, and social upheaval. Civilizations were erased, leaving void filled by empires. History of the 16th century Americas was written not only by swords, but by fever blood and final breath of millions. The 7th pandemic, the Cyprian Plague, the year 250 Common Era. The Roman Empire stretched from misty Britannia to burning Syria and from Germania to the Nile. Stone roads rang with hooves and arenas with cheers. From distant Ethiopia, a silent epidemic moved along trade routes toward Mediterranean ports. It arrived without trumpet or banner. Rumors spoke of strange sickness in Alexandria, then Carthage. Merchant ships carried goods and death. From Africa, it crossed the sea into the imperial heart. When it reached Rome, the Eternal City trembled. Contemporaries named it after Cyprian, bishop of Carthage, who described it in grim sermons. He was not its source, but its witness. He detailed symptoms as if divine judgment unfolded across Rome. In Rome, deaths reportedly reached 5,000 each day. Funeral carts filled avenues and cremation smoke darkened sky. The disease spared no rank. Slaves, nobles, soldiers, senators all fell. Symptoms began with sudden fatigue and burning fever. Then violent diarrhea, dehydration, and vomiting mixed with bile and blood. Mouths dried and throats burned. Some lost vision as eyes clouded white. Cases recorded. Limb necrosis. Fingers and toes blackened and decayed. Skin ulcerated and bodies weakened rapidly. Modern medicine suggests severe systemic infection with hemorrhage, clotting disorder, organ failure, and electrolyte collapse. The pathogen remains unknown. Smallpox was proposed, but classic rash was absent. Measles rarely causes limb necrosis. Some suggest ancient hemorrhagic fever similar to Ebola spreading from Africa through trade routes without immunity. No preserved deoxyribonucleic acid confirms it. Only texts and silence of Earth remain. Farms were abandoned and tax systems faltered. Border defenses weakened as soldiers died. The empire entered the crisis of the 3rd century between 250 and 270. Emperors were overthrown and provinces rebelled, while Germanic tribes and Persian forces pressed borders. Temples filled with prayers, yet gods were silent. Amid chaos, small Christian communities cared for sick and buried dead, shaping new image of charity. The epidemic surged in waves across 2 decades. Each return reduced population and confidence. Then it vanished without cure or declaration. It left an exhausted empire-altered society and rising Christianity. Archaeologists excavate Rome, Carthage, and Alexandria, finding coins, pottery, and bones, but no direct proof of the Cyprian plague. It survives in writing and consequence weakening empire, reshaping faith, exposing fragility of power before unseen microbes. The 8th pandemic, the plague of Justinian. The year 541 Common Era. Grain ships left the Nile Delta bound for Constantinople beneath the dome of Hagia Sophia. In dark holds, rats bred among sacks and ropes. Fleas carried unseen bacteria capable of shaking an empire. In spring 541, the outbreak began at Pelusium in Egypt. It followed trade routes toward Constantinople. By early 542, the imperial capital was besieged by an invisible enemy. Procopius described fever, headache, and exhaustion. Then swollen lymph nodes appeared in groin, armpit, and neck. Dark, painful buboes formed. Delirium followed with panic and incoherent speech. Fever rose and breathing quickened. Skin turned pale gray. Some vomited blood and others suffered severe diarrhea. In grave cases, septicemia caused dark hemorrhagic spots beneath the skin. Death came within days. At its peak, Constantinople lost 10,000 people each day. Streets filled with corpses and bells rang until none remained to pull them. Mass graves were dug beyond city walls. When space failed, bodies were stacked in towers. Decay mixed with incense and smoke. The Golden City sank into suffocating darkness. Modern estimates suggest 25 to 50 million deaths across the Mediterranean and Europe. The plague spread through Syria, Anatolia, the Balkans, Italy, and North Africa. It haunted the Byzantine world. Deoxyribonucleic acid evidence confirms Yersinia pestis the same pathogen as the 14th century Black Death. It traveled via fleas on rats and infected the lymphatic system, blood, or lungs. Climate shifts in the mid-6th century with volcanic eruptions in 536 may have altered ecosystems. Rodent populations changed and trade networks carried infection. Outbreaks returned in 558, 573, 590, and beyond for nearly 2 centuries. Justinian I sought to restore Roman glory, but manpower and revenue collapsed. Armies weakened and construction stalled. Invasions followed from Lombard Slavs and Avars. An empire was slowed by bacteria. Gradually, the wave subsided and Yersinia pestis receded without cure. The plague marked transition toward the medieval world. It endures as warning that empires can falter before invisible forces of microbes and climate. The 9th pandemic, the Antonine Plague, the year 165 Anno Domini. In the city of Seleucia on the banks of the Tigris River, gates were shattered beneath the boots of Roman legions. Smoke rose from eastern temples, ash blending into a dark red sunset. Victorious soldiers, armor still stained with blood and desert sand, did not know they carried within their lungs and blood a quieter enemy than any Parthian army. They returned west, through Antioch, through Asia Minor, along the stone roads of Anatolia. With them, the disease began to move like a shapeless shadow, sliding along the trade and military routes of the largest empire in the world at that time. By the year 166, Rome received grim news. In the capital on the Tiber River, the first fever cases were recorded. At first scattered, then surging, then impossible to control. Galen, the renowned physician of the era, witnessed the scene. He described prolonged high fever, throat inflammation, and severe diarrhea. Then a rash appeared, small fluid-filled blisters rising on the skin, bursting and forming dark scabs. In many patients, lesions penetrated into the dermis, leaving permanent scars on face and body. Breathing grew heavy, coughing blood, bloody stool. Some fell into delirium, muttering and burning fever, then falling silent forever. Symptoms progressed in a clear cycle, about 9 days, or less, or slightly more if the body endured. Survivors often carried marks for life, pitted scars on skin, sometimes blindness. Those who did not survive died in agony, dehydrated and exhausted. Many modern scholars lean toward the smallpox hypothesis, the presence of blistering lesions, a clinical course lasting about 2 weeks. And high mortality in an immunologically naive population suggests the variola virus first struck the Mediterranean on an imperial scale. Others propose severe measles, based on transmission speed and mass death in dense communities. No deoxyribonucleic acid evidence confirms it. No preserved tissue samples remain to decode. The pandemic passed before science could retain its biological trace. What remains are Galen's descriptions and scattered historical records, along with staggering estimates, from 5 to 10 million dead within more than a decade. That was not merely a number. It was 1/10 of the empire's population. From misty Britannia to sun-scorched Egypt, from Hispania to Syria, the plague moved along Roman roads with grain caravans, with ships crossing the Mediterranean. Each city became an outbreak point, each barracks an incubator. The Roman army, pillar of the Pax Romana, began to weaken. Legions on the Rhine and Danube frontiers lacked men. Recruits were hurriedly enlisted, lacking experience and endurance. In the years 167 and 168, when Germanic tribes crossed the river and invaded territory, Rome faced dual crisis: war outside and plague within. The Pax Romana, the period of peace lasting nearly 2 centuries, began to fracture. In Rome, daily deaths reached into the thousands. According to some ancient sources, bodies were carried out through the Esquiline Gate, piled high. Temples held collective prayers. Emperor Marcus Aurelius and co-emperor Lucius Verus conducted sacrificial rituals, attempting to appease angry gods. Incense smoke thickened the air, but did not conceal the odor of death. Lucius Verus died in the year 169, possibly from this very disease. Marcus Aurelius continued to rule through years of war and plague, writing the words of Meditations amid groans of a decaying world around him. In the year 180, he died at Vindobona, perhaps from recurrence of the pandemic. The death of the philosopher-emperor marked the end of a golden age. The scale of destruction reached far beyond palace and barracks. Rural areas lacked laborers. Fields lay abandoned. Trade declined. The tax system strained as the taxpayer population fell sharply. Cities lost artisans, teachers, officials. Small communities vanished from maps. Collapse did not come in a single night. It was a slow, layered process, like a patient failing from multiple organ collapse. First fever, then rash. Finally, total systemic exhaustion. Traditional religion wavered. When Jupiter and Apollo did not save the people, some turned to Eastern cults seeking new explanations for disaster. The spread of Christianity in the following century is often placed within the context of pandemics like the Antonine Plague, moments when old faith seemed powerless before mass suffering. Scholars still debate the scale of its impact on Roman decline. Some argue the empire was resilient enough to recover, that the Antonine Plague was only one among many factors. Others see structural turning point: population decline reducing economic output, thinning military ranks, and triggering reactions that echoed through the turbulent 3rd century. Tombstones increased sharply at the end of the 2nd century. Unusual expenditures appeared for ritual and relief. Military campaigns were launched hastily with depleted formations. Together they formed a dark portrait of civilization eroded from within. The pandemic did not vanish in a single season. It returned in waves for nearly 15 years. Each time it seemed to subside, it flared in another province, like embers glowing beneath ash. By the time it faded in the late 1700s, the empire had changed. The body of Rome bore scars. No ancient laboratory preserved viral samples. No gene sequence was decoded. Only memory remained. And of a time when death walked along the stone roads of the Via Appia and slipped into white-plastered homes. Only the quiet turning of history. The Antonine Plague stands as proof that even the mightiest empire can be struck down not by opposing armies, but but by invisible microorganisms. It exposed the vast connectivity of the ancient world, a network of trade and by conquest dense enough to sustain prosperity, yet wide enough to transport catastrophe from one end of a continent to another. In the footsteps of legions, I was retreating from the northern frontier, in funeral pyres reflecting upon the dome of the Pantheon, one could hear the echo of order fading. The Pax Romana did not collapse instantly, but after the year 165, it was never whole. The fracture had appeared. And in the darkness of those years, amid prayer and choked coughing, the Roman Empire entered a new age, less stable, more anxious, where death was no longer rare exception but constant rhythm of life. That pandemic. Though its name and agent remain debated, carved an indelible mark upon history, it is a reminder that civilization, even built with marble and steel discipline, remains fragile before unseen forces. In the quiet after the storm, Rome still stood, but its radiance had dimmed, like the sun setting behind once brilliant domes of a world slipping toward twilight. The final pandemic, the Plague of Emmaus. The year 639 Anno Domini, on the limestone hills of Palestine, the town of Emmaus lay silent beneath the burning light of late spring. Ancient Roman roads crossed here, linking Jerusalem to the Mediterranean coast. The Rashidun army set up camp near water sources, banners fluttering in dry heat. They had just achieved victories that shook the Near Eastern order. Yet between hoofbeats and clashing metal, another rhythm began. The rhythm of disease. The plague arrived quickly. There was no warning, no omen in the sky. A soldier collapsed while standing guard. Fever surged within hours, his temperature rising beyond endurance. His face flushed red, then turned pale. Pupils dilated. Cold sweat formed. By afternoon, lymph nodes in his groin swelled hard beneath skin. Pain pierced to the bone. Before sunset, he was dead. One day, the illness at Emmaus seemed more ruthless than other outbreaks of that year. Mortality was extremely high. Later chronicles described healthy men collapsing within 24 hours of first symptoms. Progression was so rapid that physicians could not intervene, even with limited methods of their era. High fever, violent chills, then swelling in armpits, neck, groin. In some cases, skin turned lead gray. Sign of septicemia. Tiny hemorrhagic spots appeared beneath skin. Breathing quickened, pulse raced, then weakened. Death came like a cold cut. Many modern scholars suspect Yersinia pestis, bacterium-causing plague. Rapid progression and high mortality suggest septicemic or pneumonic forms, able to kill within a single day without treatment. Yet no direct archaeological evidence confirms Emmaus. No bones sequenced, no bacteria isolated from Palestinian soil. This event occurred the same year as the Plague of Amwas, yet Emmaus seemed distinct center, outbreak of its own intensity, like two parallel storms across one land. It may have been same wave across the Levant. It may have been independent outbreaks from one pathogen. Records may have merged memories into one continuous tragedy. Regardless of interpretation, military camps at Emmaus became spaces of panic. Senior commanders fell one after another. Men who led thousands now lay motionless in tents. Loss was not only manpower but rupture in leadership structure. Command transferred hastily. Younger officers, less experienced, assumed responsibility while plague raged. The army, pillar of expansion, grew fragile. Orders to move were delayed. Marches canceled. Units dispersed to reduce infection. Yet dispersal weakened defense and attack. In broader context, year 639 marked critical phase in Islamic consolidation of Syria and Palestine. Jerusalem had surrendered only years earlier. Byzantine order yielded to new authority. Amid turbulent transition, disease intervened like invisible force, slowing historical momentum. Religion became spiritual anchor. Prayers rose at night, mixed with coughing and groans. Some saw plague as sacred test, purification of faith. Others feared quietly, realizing no fortress or victory was immune to bacteria. Emmaus was not large metropolis like Jerusalem, yet its position on strategic road made it vital junction. Outbreak there risked regional spread. Merchants, travelers, soldiers could unknowingly carry infection onward. Ancient connectivity, though slower than modern times, still sustained transmission chains. Ancient sources provide no precise death toll for Emmaus, yet descriptions of extremely high mortality in short span depict devastation. Mass graves may have been dug hastily, bodies buried quickly to limit contagion. No clear archaeological confirmation remains, only narrative and tradition. After outbreak, disease subsided. No long annual recurrence occurred at Emmaus. No clearly recorded consecutive waves within same century. It was as if microbial storm appeared, devastated, then vanished for centuries. This disappearance deepened mystery. Yersinia pestis can persist in wild rodents, re-emerging when conditions allow. If it was plague, perhaps no stable reservoir endured here, or climate, population, urban structure were insufficient for long-term transmission. Political consequences did not vanish as quickly as bacteria. Deaths of multiple military leaders in 1 year forced caliphate to restructure command. New figures appointed, power redistributed, campaigns recalculated. History did not stop, yet its trajectory shifted. In long rhythm of ancient history, the plague of Emmaus was brief yet piercing note. It reminds that civilizations are shaped not only by great battles and treaties, but by sudden biological shocks. Image of soldier collapsing before drawing sword. Image of young commander assuming authority among tents filled with corpses. Image of dark swollen nodes beneath sunburned skin. These details were not carved in stone, yet embedded within invisible structure of history. Over centuries, Emmaus returned to calm of ancient locality. Dust of time covered memory of plague. Yet if one listens carefully, an evening wind over ruins, echoes of year 639 remain, year when death came in one day, and rising empire faced fragile limits of human power. The plague of Emmaus left no deoxyribonucleic acid for analysis, no clear artifact for excavation. It left absence. Within that absence, history whispers about fragility of civilization, about how a small bacterium can shake military leadership and slow imperial expansion. Between desert and limestone of Palestine, year 639 lingers as long shadow in human memory, proof that even in moments of expansion and victory, death can arrive within a single day and alter direction of history for centuries. Those 10 pandemics did not merely kill people, they tore apart the very soul of civilizations that once believed themselves eternal. Fortresses crumbled, temples were abandoned, mighty empires vanished as if they had never existed. And the most terrifying truth is this: history has proven that the invisible enemy never truly disappeared. It has only been waiting. As you finish this video, ask yourself, if an ancient pandemic were to return today, would our modern world truly stand strong? Or is it nothing more than a fragile illusion